Hello once again, friends, neighbors, and fellow Christians, and welcome back to another lesson in this study of where we are studying the last days kingdom that was foretold by Moses and the prophets, that it would come in the last days, and it would be a kingdom unlike any other kingdom that this world has ever seen. It would be not left to other people, but this kingdom would stand forever, and it would be universal in scope, and it would be spiritual in nature, and it would be eternal. And so we've been studying very much in this line of thought, in this series of lessons, and we are studying presently one of the promises that was associated with the coming of this eternal messianic kingdom, and that is the resurrection. And so we have been studying in 1 Corinthians 15, and we are down to verse 54, and we'll go there and look at that. In 1 Corinthians 15, and this is Paul's discourse, if you will, on the resurrection as he writes to the Corinthians. And so we have looked at the harvest language that he uses in this text, but we are down to verse 54, where Paul says, "So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory." And so Paul quotes from Isaiah 25 and verse 8, as we have pointed out in previous lessons. And so we have been looking back at the context of that particular verse and the surrounding context in the chapter, as well as chapters 24 through 28, 29 of Isaiah, what is referred to as the little apocalypse. And so we have looked at that, and we've been noting the timing, because in chapter 25 of Isaiah, you had the destruction of the temple, verse 2. You had the destruction of the city, verse 12, which Jesus quotes that verse in Luke 19 and applies it to the fall of Jerusalem. And so again, we've been looking at the timing and trying to ascertain why Paul would say that the resurrection would be the fulfillment of Isaiah 25:8. And so that's what we've been investigating in the last several lessons. And so now today we want to go on into verse 55. And so we'll look at this, verse 55. Here, and I want to try to make the text a little bit larger so you can make this easier to see. And so, again, he says, "When the corruptible puts on incorruption, the mortal puts on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written," Isaiah 25:8, "death is swallowed up in victory." Verse 55, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" Now, again, this is one of those King James mistranslations here, because this is the word Hades, and we'll look at that, because if we look at it in even the New King James Version, even they get it right. "O death, where is your sting? O Hades." Do you see that right there? "O Hades, where is your victory?" And so, that begs the question, why? And this word Hades, 11, let's just look at that. All right, this is the word 11 times right there. It shows you there in Strong's, the King James occurrences. This word appears 11 times in the New Testament. And what is remarkable is 10 of those 11 places, well, again, the King James uses the word hell, which is not right. It is Hades. But nevertheless, at least they are consistent. The 10 other places this word is used, the King James translators rendered it as hell. But in this one occurrence, just, why did they say, "O grave"? And again, I think I've made this statement in the past. I wonder how much of the error would not exist today had they translated that, even as they did everywhere else, "O hell, where is your victory?" But it would have been better to have translated that as Hades, as the New King James does, and most of the other translations as well. But anyway, we have to understand this word hell. That is an invention of mankind and is inserted into the Holy Scriptures. The term is Hades. All right. It does not mean the grave, a hole in the ground, or a slot at the mausoleum, a tomb. That's not what the word means. This is Hades. All right. It is the abode of the unseen, the dead souls. The souls go to Hades, and they were held there. They went. I'll use correct grammar here. They went to Hades, and they were held there until Jesus conquered Hades. And so, again, to restate a point I've made in the past, this physical hole in the ground, the graves, what we understand as a grave, that cannot contain a soul. So that's what we need to be clear on. But okay, so when we look at this, death is swallowed up in victory, Isaiah 25:8. Paul says, "O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory?" And so Paul conflates Isaiah 25:8 and Hosea 13:14 here, stating that the resurrection would be the fulfillment of these texts. So again, we have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why is Paul, from our perspective today and what we were taught about the resurrection, that it is this visible bodily, some kind of bodily, individual bodily coming, bodies coming out of the graves and corpses out of the dirt at this mythological end of time. And if that were true, then why would Paul say that event in our future would be the fulfillment of these prophecies, which he is conflating here? And see, that's where futurism falls to the ground and just collapses into a little pile of dust, because it cannot be. Remember, Jesus said, not one jot or one tittle would pass from the law and the prophets until every jot and tittle was fulfilled. So if Isaiah 25:8 and Hosea 13:14, which Paul is quoting here, are not yet fulfilled, then every jot and tittle of the law of Moses remains binding and in force. And I don't know anybody in the churches of Christ that would make that argument. The fact that they will admit that the law of Moses was fulfilled in the first century, they say at the cross, that's wrong, but in the first century, at least they're in the right century. The fact that they make that admission, then that in itself refutes the entire futurist paradigm. But let's go on here, and I want to look at some passages in connection with what Paul says here in our text. O death, where is thy sting? O Hades, where is thy victory? Now, the first passage I want to look at is from Psalms 49. Now this is a very interesting psalm here, and I strongly encourage you to go and read this entire psalm. Read it 2, 3, or 4 times, because there's a lot of interesting ideas in this psalm. And even at the heading of it, it says that this is referring to the sons of Korah. Okay, so that should spark some interest to you there, because Paul talks about the gainsaying of Korah, those who withstood Moses. Okay, but anyway, notice that David writing here says, like sheep they are laid in the grave, death shall feed on them, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning, and their beauty shall consume in the grave from their dwelling. Now, again, this is another one of those instances of the King James mistranslation. And just to demonstrate this, let's look at the English Standard Version, just as a for instance, because even the New King James translator got it wrong in the Old Testament. All right, like sheep, they are appointed for Sheol. Do you see that? Let's look at that in Brenton's English translation of the Septuagint. They have laid them as sheep in Hades. Do you see that, folks? Do you see how Sheol and Hades, the terms are synonymous? Sheol is Hebrew, Hades is Greek. It's the two different languages for the same idea. See that? All right, so we'll go back to the English Standard Version then for the continuation. All right, like sheep, they are appointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol, with no place to dwell. But God will, now notice this, but God will ransom. What's a ransom, folks? Think about that. What is a ransom? You know, a child, for instance, is kidnapped, and the kidnappers call the parents and demand a large sum of money as a ransom to have their son returned, their child returned. See that? God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive them. So how was David's soul ransomed from the power of Sheol? Well, that's through the blood of Christ, right? Okay. Be not, no, wait, I moved my cursor, sorry. Be not afraid when man becomes rich. Now, I want you to notice the concepts here, okay? Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases. For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him. For though while he lives, he counts himself blessed. Okay, do you see that? I mean, I'm suspecting that several concepts, several passages have just popped into your mind in reading these three verses here, like the rich farmer. Do you remember the rich farmer who said, I'll say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said, thou fool, this night your soul will be required of you. And then who's going to have all those things that you have prospered in? And then we have the story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke chapter 16. The rich man that was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And then there was the poor beggar man, but they both died. The poor man was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man died also and was buried. He had a burial. But in Hades, he lifted up his eyes being in torment. Do you see that? Do you see that concept here in Psalm 49? Be not afraid when a man becomes rich and the glory of his house increases, for when he dies, he will carry nothing away. Well, that's what Paul said to Timothy. We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can take nothing out. All right. I mean, it's again, just go there and read Psalms 49, because that is a very interesting text there. Primarily, verse 15, where David says that God will ransom or redeem my soul from the power of Sheol. And we're going to study quite a few passages. We won't get through them all today. But we're going to study quite a few passages of this line of thought here of being redeemed from the power of Sheol. So we see that in Psalms 49. But as I see it, Paul is quoting specifically from Hosea 13:14, which says, I will ransom, there's that again, there's that element. I will ransom them from the power of, and again, that's the King James Version. Let's look at the English Standard again. Shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? Shall I redeem them from death? O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting? Do you see that? Paul is quoting verbatim from Hosea 13:14 when he says, O death, where is your victory? O death, that is Sheol. I wanted to make that point to make sure that you see, that you understand that Paul is not talking about corpses out of the dirt, a corpse out of casket type of resurrection. That's not what Paul is talking about. He is talking about souls out of Hades, souls being ransomed from the power of Sheol. That's the text, folks. That's what the text says, from which Paul is quoting, which he says that this is going to be, the resurrection would fulfill this passage here, this prophecy. All right, again, that is taken from Hosea 13:14, back up in the same chapter, and look at verses 1 and 2. This says, when Ephraim spake trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. But when he offended in Baal, he died. All right, now, to demonstrate that this is not talking about being physically alive and physically dying, look at the next verse. And now they sin more and more, and have made them molten images of silver, idols according to their own understanding, all of it the work of the craftsman. They say of them, let the men that sacrifice kiss the calves. All right, so again, this demonstrates that the context is not dealing with physical, biological life and physical death. So what's he talking about? When Ephraim spake trembling, he exalted himself. Well, we can understand the idea of exalting himself. All right. When he spake trembling, when he was humble, when he was obedient, so forth, then he was exalted. But when he offended in Baal, he died. Why? Because he was cast out of the presence of God. He died. They continued to sin more and more. See, physically dead people cannot sin more and more, can they? I mean, that's an impossibility. So now, what I want to look at is, when we look at, well, let's see. Go back, and again, I'm just going to touch on 2 or 3 verses here, but go back and read the whole chapter of 1 Kings chapter 12. And this deals with when the kingdom of Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. And so you had the 10 northern tribes, and they are distinguished and referred to as Ephraim or Israel, while Judah, the kingdom of Judah, included Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And so when we look back, for instance, right here, and again, back up in the text, and you'll see that Rehoboam, which was Solomon's son, and so at the death of Solomon then, this is when this takes place here, Rehoboam became the king, rightfully so, because he was in the bloodline, if you will. He was the successor of his father, Solomon, and he was the rightful heir to the throne of David. And so the kingdom divided, and then Jeroboam was elected, for lack of maybe a better term, as king over the northern tribes. And so it says here, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David, if this people go up and do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel, and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And so this describes then the idolatry. And the reason that I point that out is because of what we read in Hosea 13, 1 and 2, that when Ephraim offended in Baal, he died. You see, Israel died. They were cast out of the presence of God. They went into Assyrian captivity. Then when they came out of that, they were scattered among the nations. But there is going to be a regathering, which, again, we've been studying that quite a bit and come across that point, that element, the gathering, the regathering, in many of our lessons in the past. And so, again, go there and read 1 Kings chapter 12. Now, in thinking about Ephraim, all right, I want us to notice some things here. Now remember, verse 54, Paul quotes Isaiah 25, verse 8, death is swallowed up in victory. All tears will be wiped away, etc. And we've been looking at the context of chapter 24 through chapter 27 of Isaiah. Chapter 28 of Isaiah, interestingly, begins with, woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim. Isn't that interesting? Look at that. Whose glorious beauty is a fading flower. Again, think about the concept there. Jesus talking about the flower and how it's adorned and more beautiful than Solomon was arrayed, and you know, it lasts a day and it's cut down. Anyway, just an idea there. Whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which are on the head of the fat valleys of them that are overcome with wine. Behold, the Lord hath a mighty and a strong one, which as a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall cast down to the earth with the hand. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, shall be trodden underfoot. And the glorious beauty which is on the head of the fat, and scholars describe the location of this city, that Ephraim is the capital, Samaria is the capital, and the way it's situated, the landscape and so forth, resembles that of a crown or a wreath. And so that's what the language seems to be pointing to here as a crown. But anyway, he says it shall be as a fading flower and as the hasty fruit before the summer, which when he looketh upon it, sees, while it is yet in his hand, he eats it up. In that day, there's that phrase again. In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory. Notice that. In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory and for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people. Now, there's a couple of interesting things in this verse that I want to look at. I want us to study together just a little bit. And then, Lord willing, in the next lesson, I want to go on a little bit lower in this chapter and notice some really interesting things that are stated in this chapter. So that'll be, again, your homework. Read the entire chapter and be prepared for the next lesson. But with this idea, I want you to notice this idea about this crown of glory. In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory. All right. So let's compare that with the same writer, Isaiah chapter 62, where the writer says, and for Zion's sake will I not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest until the righteousness thereof go forth as brightness, and the salvation thereof as a lamp that burns. And the Gentiles shall see thy righteousness, and all kings thy glory, and thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. Now again, we've read this and looked at this passage several times in previous lessons. But again, I want you to notice this. The Gentiles will see thy righteousness, all kings thy glory. Thou shalt be called by a new name. Again, that's first century, right? Thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. Thou shalt also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. Thou shalt be no more termed forsaken, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate, but thou shalt be called Hephzibah. Forgive my pronunciation skills there. And thy land Beulah, for the Lord delighteth in thee, and thy land shall be married. That's an interesting phrase there. Now, is it not? Thy land shall be married. That seems to indicate that maybe he's not talking about physical dirt. All right. For as a young man marrieth a virgin, so shall thy sons marry thee. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall thy God rejoice over thee. So here we have the elements of the Gentiles being called by a new name, the crown of glory, and the wedding. Isn't that interesting, folks? Now again, read the whole chapter. I'm going to drop down and look at verses 10 and 11. But verse 10 says, Go through the gates, prepare ye the way of the people. Now notice that. Prepare ye the way of the people, cast up the highway, gather out the stones, lift up a standard for the people. I mean, just notice these elements here, all right? Okay, so he says, talks about casting up this highway and lifting up a standard. Well, again, this same prophet wrote back in chapter 40, Comfort ye my people, saith your God. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her warfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she hath received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Now notice, the voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. All flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. And then drop down, again, read the whole text, but drop down and look at verse 10 of Isaiah 40. Behold, the Lord God will come with a strong hand. Well, see, that's what we just read there in the previous verses there in Isaiah 28, that he'll cast down to the earth with the hand. He has a strong hand. See that? Same element. Behold, the Lord will come with a strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. Notice, behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him, which points to our trilogy text of Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Mark 8 through 9, 1, and Luke 9, 26 and 27. Also, this is reiterated in Revelation 22 and verse 12, where Jesus says, Behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. So here we see these elements here in connection. So again, with the idea of the crown and the Gentiles being called by a new name, you have the element of the wedding in Isaiah 62. But again, just look at these connections here in these scriptures, folks. All right, so Isaiah 62:10, go through the gates, prepare the way of the people, cast up a highway, gather out the stones, lift up a standard for the people. Next verse, behold, the Lord hath proclaimed unto the end of the world. Now again, here's another example of the King James mistranslation. This should be at least earth or land here. They've translated it as world. Now I want to show you this. All right, behold, the Lord hath proclaimed unto the end of the world. And again, this is not saying the end of time. It's not talking about the end of the universe. Again, I'm going to demonstrate this. Say ye to the daughter of Zion, Behold, thy salvation comes. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. Again, folks, that's what we've just read from Isaiah 40, 1 through 5, Isaiah 40, 10, the trilogy text that I referred to, and Revelation 22. Here we find it in Isaiah 62, verse 11. But notice the connection. The Lord hath proclaimed unto the end of the world. Now, Let's look at that in the Septuagint, Brenton's English translation of the Septuagint. And that verse says, "For behold, the Lord has proclaimed to the end of the earth." All right, so that's a little better. Now, here's what's interesting. This phrase, "proclaimed to the end of the earth," in the Greek, and the Septuagint, as you know, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. And so, again, here's what's interesting, just stunning. This exact phrase in the Greek of "proclaimed to the end of the earth," this phrase is found 2 times in the New Testament. And interestingly enough, we find this exact phrase on the lips of Jesus in Acts 1 and verse 8, and I have to get out of Brenton's because he didn't translate the New Testament. All right? So we'll go back to the King James. And let's look at Acts 1 and verse 8. And this is where the disciples asked Jesus, "Wilt thou at this time restore the kingdom unto Israel?" He said, "It's not for you to know the times and the seasons that the Lord has put in his own power." But, verse 8, "But you shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you. And you shall be witnesses unto me, both in Jerusalem and in all Judea, and in Samaria," notice, "and unto the uttermost part of the earth." Again, that is the exact phrase that we read in Isaiah 62 and verse 11. "Behold, the Lord hath proclaimed unto the end of the earth." I mean, isn't that just fascinating that we find Jesus quoting Isaiah 62:11 there to the apostles and applying it to their ministry. That's what he's doing here. He is applying it to their ministry, that they would be witnesses of him unto the uttermost part of the earth. Now watch this, because we find that phrase one more time, and that is in Romans 10 and verse 18. "But I say," says Paul, "but I say, have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sound went into all the earth, and their words," here's the phrase, "unto the ends of the world," earth, to the ends of the earth. That is the exact same phrase in the Greek from Isaiah 62 and verse 11. So now, I'm sure that if you're following and understand, realize eschatology, you know where this goes. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus told the apostles, well, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, but it would be translated to the apostles, transferred. He told them that this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. Then, time word, then shall the end come. And so whatever the end is in the context of Matthew 24, then it would come about, it would occur after the gospel had been preached in all the world as a witness unto all nations. And right here in Romans 10:18, we have Paul quoting Isaiah 62:11 and saying that it has been accomplished. Do you see that? So whatever end that Jesus is talking about in the Olivet Discourse that he said would occur when the gospel had been preached in all the world, then it had to be right on the doorstep, because Paul said that mission had been accomplished, right? And in other places, there's like 6 places in the New Testament where Paul says this, but right there's one of them. And he says, their sound went into all the earth, their words unto the ends of the earth. Quoting Isaiah 62:11, which Jesus quoted in Acts 1 verse 8 and told the apostles that they would be his witnesses unto the uttermost parts of the earth. Once you see these connections, folks, you just cannot unsee them. All right. So again, with this idea in mind, the crown of glory, notice what Peter says in 1 Peter 5. Verse 1, the elders which are among you I exhort, who also am an elder. He's, by the way, he's at the church in Babylon. When you read down to the bottom of that chapter, Peter is an elder, the church of Babylon. You need to get that. Because Peter was an elder at the church in Jerusalem. Ta-da! I mean, there's your connection that Jerusalem is Babylon. I mean, that's like, wow, there's your billboard. Flashing neon lighted billboard. Ding, ding, ding. Jerusalem is Babylon. All right. He says, the elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Now let's look at that in a little more accurate translation. Let's look at the the KJ3, for instance. I exhort the elders among you, I being a fellow elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a share and being sharer of, now notice, the glory about to be revealed. You see that? See, when you look back to the original language, that is the present tense verb mellow there. Peter says Christ's glory, and that's what Jesus said in the trilogy text, Matthew 16:27, for the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of the Father. Peter said that glory is about to be revealed. See that? Feed the flock, Peter says, feed the flock of God, which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. Now, just as an aside, isn't that interesting right there, that Peter tells the elders to lead by example? Do you see that? Isn't that interesting? Lead by example. That's how a true leader leads, and that is by example. He doesn't lead from behind. He doesn't lead by saying, now you do this and you do that. Well, I don't do anything. They lead by example. All right. And when the chief shepherd shall appear. Now notice he just said that the glory is about to be revealed. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, you shall receive a crown of glory that fades not away. Isn't that interesting? All right, so again, and there's the texts, and I'll make that a little bit larger so you can see those. All right, and so you can easily pause the video and go back and read all these passages and sit down with a cup of coffee and take time to read and study and meditate and pray about what these texts say. All right, so Isaiah 28 verse 5 says, in that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory, for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people. Now again, with this idea of the residue, and as we shall see, the remnant, that'd be synonymous. Again, more homework for you. Go back and read Isaiah chapters 10 and 11, because this is such a rich text. So many concepts and things that are stated in this text, and it like Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. It's just such a rich text. But anyway, verse 20 says that it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote him, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. All right, so now again, if we back up just a little bit, in the same text, we see that it says, therefore shall the Lord of hosts, send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame, and it shall burn and devour his thorns and briars in one day. Now, again, you got to catch this. You got to notice what the prophet is saying here. The light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame, and it, the flame, shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day, and shall consume the glory of his forest and of his fruitful field, both soul and body. Notice that. Shall consume the glory of his forest and of his fruitful field, both soul and body, and they shall be as when a standard bearer faints. Now, isn't that, and again, what should have already come to your mind are the words of Jesus that we find in Matthew 10 verse 28, where Jesus says, "Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." And let's look at what that word is. That word, and I'll have to go there, excuse me. That word is not Hades. Do you see that? He will destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Now, isn't that really, really interesting? He wouldn't destroy both soul and body in Hades. He would destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. And if you recall, death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire in Revelation chapter 20. I just find that remarkably interesting there, that we find this same idea of both soul and body being burnt up in Isaiah 10. All right, let's go on. All right, so again, from the idea of both soul and body being burnt up, compare that with Malachi chapter 4 and verse 1. Now again, read chapters 3 and 4 of Malachi. They're not long chapters. It won't take you but a few minutes to read them. But verse 1 of chapter 4 says, "For behold, the day comes that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall leave them neither root nor branch." Now again, you have to get the context to understand who the them is. And the them are they, back in chapter 3, who are transgressing the covenant. That's Israel. That's the same folks that's being talked about in our text here in Isaiah 28. All right, now, and then again, Hebrews 12, verse 29, "For our God is a consuming fire." All right, now as we go on, catch a couple more verses here in Isaiah 10, verses 21 and 22. All right, verse 20 said, "It'll come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel," all right, verse 21, "the remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob unto the mighty God. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return." Do you see that? Now again, here is what is interesting. Paul quotes this verse in Romans chapter 9. He even names the prophet, so we don't have to even guess about what he's talking about. Paul says Isaiah also cried concerning who? Israel. "Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved." Then Paul goes on in chapter 11 and writes, "Even so then at this present time," that's Paul's present time, "there is a remnant according to the election of grace. And if by grace, then it is no more of works." And you can read the rest of the passage there. And so what Isaiah was predicting here, Paul quotes and applies the fulfillment during his ministry in Romans chapter 9, verse 27, and Romans 11, verses 5 through 6. Then as I said, you need to read Isaiah 10 and 11. When we jump over into chapter 11, here we find this same idea again that we saw earlier in Isaiah 40 about the highway, Isaiah 62:10 about the highway. We find the same concept, the same element in chapter 11. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria. So again, notice that, and notice the connection that we saw that very thing in the previous chapter of Isaiah that we have been studying. That it will come to pass in that day that the Lord shall beat off from the channel of the river into the stream of Egypt, and you shall be gathered one by one, O you children of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, that Jesus quoted, or well, alluded to anyway, in Matthew 24:31. Again, folks, do you see these connections and how these things fit together like a perfect jigsaw puzzle? Okay, there'll be a highway for the remnant. But when we back up to verse 1 of chapter 11, it begins with, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. But guess what? Paul quotes this verse in Romans 15, even naming the prophet, where he says, Isaiah says, there shall be a root of Jesse, and he that shall rise to reign over the Gentiles, and in him shall the Gentiles trust. So again, here we have these prophecies in Isaiah 10 and 11, and we have Paul quoting from these texts, from these prophetic texts, applying them to Israel of his day during his ministry, even inclusive of the salvation of the Gentiles. And as we read there from Isaiah, that the Gentiles will be called by a new name. Isaiah 62:2. All right, now, again, looking at Isaiah 11, verses 10 through 12, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. That's the same thing he said in verse 1 that Paul quoted in Romans 15. In that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. Remember the verse we read earlier about a standard would be lifted up for the people? Remember that? And it says, and to it the Gentiles will seek, and his rest shall be glorious. It'll come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, and again, this is the same thing, and we just read this from Isaiah 27, verses 12 and 13. So again, notice the parallels here. Notice the parallelism and the connections here. Verse 12, and he shall set it up for an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and shall gather together. There's the synagogue. Look at that in the Greek. That's the gathering. It's in the same word family as the episynagoge of 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 1 and Hebrews 10:25 that we studied in the last lesson. Notice that. And he'll gather together the dispersed. Well, that's who Peter was writing to. 1 Peter 1:1. Peter was writing to the diaspora. Again, same word family here, same word. And he was going to gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. All right, verse 13. The envy also of Ephraim. And there's our connection. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. So there was a time coming when this gathering would take place, that this enmity between Ephraim and Judah, the two kingdoms, would not exist any longer. And Ezekiel 37 should be popping into your minds. of when the two kingdoms would become one kingdom. There would no more be two kingdoms. The illustration there of the two sticks in his hand, it would become one stick. And that prophecy culminated with the giving of the eternal kingdom, the new covenant that Paul quotes in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, telling the Corinthians they are what Ezekiel foretold. Again, folks, you can't deny these connections here. And again, Isaiah 40, verses 3 and 4, the voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. And we just read this passage earlier right here in connection with the crown. And again, I stuck this here as my own mental note, Isaiah 49, that I suggested you go read that chapter because there's a lot of interesting things, concepts in that particular chapter. And so we're going to stop with our study right here this morning. And again, take the time to go back and go through this video slowly, and you can look these scriptures up and really look at and study and ponder these connections, and especially the ones where we see that the Apostle Paul quotes these prophecies and he applies the fulfillment of them during his ministry. And that's, again, that's where, it doesn't take much effort and much interpretation on our part, because here we have the inspired Apostle Paul naming the prophet, quoting his words as relevant and applying to Israel and the Gentiles during his ministry. And so again, it's when we allow the Bible to interpret itself, this is the simplicity, and this is the beauty of the simplicity by which we can ascertain the truth on these various subjects. And again, that's studying through parallelism and these connections that we see in these texts. And so, again, I want to thank you for your time in studying with us. I thank you for all the views that the videos are receiving and the likes. And I pray that you will share these videos out with your friends and neighbors. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, please go right down there and hit the subscribe button. And that way you'll be notified of when we upload a new video. And again, if you are new to the series, then go back. I know there's a lot of them, but go back and take the time to study this series of lessons that we have been putting together on this last days kingdom that was foretold by Moses and the prophets, that it would come in this period of time that was referred to as the last days. All right, so with these thoughts, we'll close our lesson, and we look forward to being with you again, in which you can study with us, and praying that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. Thank you so much for your time.